Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for the gaming PC that I like to call the ultimate do-it-all system that costs a fair bit but doesn't cost an absolute arm and a leg but still has absolutely epic gaming performance so you don't really need any more? Now, obviously that doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, so the title is probably a little bit shorter, but I'm incredibly excited about this because Scan Computers actually gave me free range to... Free range? We're not eggs. They actually gave me free range. I've said it again. Free range? Free reign! I don't know what's wrong with me, I actually had to look that up. Anyway, Scan Computers actually gave me free reign to choose all of the components inside this rig from their website, which is pretty cool. So a massive thank you to Scan Computers for actually sponsoring this video in partnership with AMD. And there are some incredible deals and bundles to be had over at Scan at the moment on AMD components. So regardless of whether you want an AMD Ryzen CPU, a Radeon GPU, or a combination of the two, as I say, some pretty epic prices, and all of the details can be found down in the description below, as obviously they are subject to change by the time you watch this video, but they end on the 30th of June. So don't miss out. If you're in the UK, Scan Computers is the place to go. But let's waste absolutely no time at all and actually get this build up and running. And the first thing I want to do is talk about the platform, because obviously it's AMD, but we're going for B650E. And personally speaking, I think for most gamers, this is the way you're going to want to go, because it's high-end enough that you've got all of the features that you need. Obviously DDR5 memory, support for current and future AM5 processors. This one also has USB BIOS flashback as well, so if you wanted to go for like a 9000 series AMD CPU in a month or two's time, obviously you can do that, and it will support it without needing an existing CPU. But because you have this little E, which stands for Extreme, you get PCI Gen 5 on the 16X slot and one of the SSD slots as well, which essentially means it's really future-proof into the future. So not only is it future CPUs, but also future graphics cards, and of course, current high-end and future PCIe SSDs. It's a great way to go and isn't going to break the bank compared with something like X670E. So we're going to take this out of the box. Our brand new motherboard, look at that. This ain't no review sample. I'm going to get the smell of motherboard as well. Oh yeah. This motherboard should have pretty much everything you need, including Wi-Fi support, loads of USB, and because AMD aren't tight like the competition, if you do want to do some overclocking, you can actually do this on the B series of AMD motherboards as well. Obviously support for extra SSDs as well, although it's only this top one that is PCI Gen 5. Pretty much everything really you need on this, and obviously it's a good looking motherboard to boot as well. I mean, quite literally to boot. In terms of the CPU we're going for, obviously this is an AM5 compatible CPU. This is pretty much the most popular one that you guys are after at the moment, and it's what I use on my personal rig. This is the 8-core 7800X3D, so you've got 8 cores of AMD goodness, but you have that 3D V cache on this, which is perfect for gaming. So in terms of gaming performance, it is going to trade blows with other CPUs, but pretty much it's generally regarded as the best gaming CPU you can get right now, especially for the money as well. It's a lot cheaper than like the competition's top spec CPU, and it doesn't need such a big cooler because it's not going to consume over 200 watts. But let's open this up and then grab our CPU, and you'll notice as well that you don't actually get a cooler inside. One thing that does annoy me about the AMD packaging is it's a little bit wasteful. I mean, you don't need it to be so big. I think it's because a bigger box makes the product better, but that's not true. You could definitely scale it down, but that's a PC-centric moan for another day. Instead, you just want to grab this little lever here. It will require a little bit of force actually when you lift this up and put it down. I think this catches quite a lot of people out, but just very gently open this up. Please do not touch any of the pins. Don't have anything falling on top of it, because if you ruin the pins, then your motherboard is basically kaput. So being very careful, grab your AMD CPU, line it up with the notches, and then give it a slight wiggle until it's in place. Lower this back down, and then this is the bit that requires a bit of force. Just get that into position, and then this cover should come off by itself. So that is the CPU, or the brain of the computer complete, but we will need a couple more bits for our motherboard. Obviously we need some storage, as this is going to hold Windows or games and actually allow us to use our PC as a PC. And then of course we need some memory, or RAM, random access memory. And this is a Corsair kit. Importantly, if you can, not the end of the world, but if you can, it will definitely help. Go for a kit that says AMD Expo on it, because this actually has its own overclocking profile in it that is optimized for AMD. So you should get slightly better compatibility, and in some cases better performance as well. But this is a 6000 megahertz kit, and in terms of capacity, it is 32 gigabytes. If you want to learn the differences, by the way, between 16, 32, 48, and 64 gig, we've actually done a gaming test on this. You can find that video in the top right corner of your screen. But otherwise, just grab your memory out of its plastic container. Then you want to open up slots 2 and slots 4, and then this enables dual channel operation. So if you put it in slots 1 and 2, you'd actually be getting half the memory speed. So I know this is a little bit confusing, and this is why you should actually read the instructions, but otherwise you just grab your memory and push it down into position, but does require just a little bit of force. Once you've done that, you then need to grab your screwdrivers, and you will need a total of 2, one larger size Phillips crosshead and one slightly smaller one. We are going to install the SSD in this top slot here, but I will say if you grab a PCI Gen 5 SSD at a later date, then you will need to swap them around, because as I say, this top slot is the only one that does actually support PCI Gen 5. But just remove this and take off the little stickers and labels and things, but most importantly, this little thermal pad protective cover, I guess. Film is probably the right way of describing that, as this is what's going to actually allow the heat to transfer from the SSD into this and then obviously be dissipated with the airflow that's going throughout your system. But you will need to grab the SSD. This one is the MP600 Elite, and I will admit that Corsair SSDs do get slightly confusing because they seem to have a lot of them and they change them frequently, have a load of different names. Anyway, the most important thing is to actually look at the speeds of the SSD. So this one is up to 7,000 meg on the reads, 6,200 on the writes, so really, really quick. And even for like future games that use direct storage, you're not going to have an issue with this drive, at least in theory. So once again, remove this from the plastic container. This is like plastic container simulator, isn't it? This is a game in and of itself. You can grab it and actually gently line this up with this top slot, move it down into position, and then you can kind of hug it in place with this little catch, I suppose, which I do find a little bit pointless because I think it would be a lot easier if the whole thing was toolless, but some motherboards are doing that now, and I imagine the next gen of Asus boards probably will as well. But for now, you are going to need a screwdriver to get this back in position. With that done and dusted, you are pretty much now ready to put this inside your chassis. But the last thing I would always advise doing before you do this is just to have a look at your CPU cooler and check whether it's worth mounting that now. Because if you're going for an air cooler, then definitely you want to put this on and then put the whole thing in your rig. Again, it's much easier than doing it in the case. If you have a water cooler like we have here, then quite often the mounting is also easier to be done now rather than once it's inside the case. But let's have a look inside. So this is actually a pretty high-end cooler, but compared to the 360 version, this is definitely not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than the 360 version. I think this came out roughly 170, 180 pounds, which is still a lot, but this actually uses the brand new Corsair IQ Link system, which means that actually getting this installed is way easier, and then all of your fans can be connected and daisy chained together with just like 1 or 2 cables rather than having 2 cables for every fan. So this makes everything a lot easier if you can stomach the cost. But the thing that we're actually looking for is this bag that says AMD on it, and inside this we will actually find some screws, and this is the magic token admission fee for our cooler. And this is definitely the bit that I think is quite good to see on video before you actually build this yourself, because it is very simple, but suddenly, oh, take off the socket mount for your CPU. That sounds quite scary, right? But it's actually by design. It's just 2 bits of plastic and 2 screws just come out. Then you want to grab those screws that we've just taken out of the AMD bag and just gently screw this down into the motherboard on all 4 pegs. And just like that, your motherboard is now ready to go in your chassis. So let's take the opportunity to park that to one side for a second and then move on to the chassis. And let's be honest, this is the GOAT of the PC case world. This is the Corsair 4000D, and it's a really good, reliable case. Now, the problem with it is that it's not massive. So if you want to fit like gigantic GPUs and put a radiator at the front, then it's not optimal for that. But as long as that doesn't bother you, then I think you're going to love it, because most people actually want to have their computer on their desk, and you don't want something that's too big or it's obviously going to take up too much space. And when it comes to price as well, there aren't actually too many high quality PC cases available for under £100, but this certainly is one of them. If you get this on sale as well, it can often be around about 80 or so. And while it doesn't come with a load of high-end fans, let's be honest, you probably want to swap this out for something better anyway. And because you get 2 as standard, it means that in the meantime, maybe like save some money, focus on the performance components, and then you can upgrade that later without having to buy some fans day one, which is quite nice. So yes, very easy to build in, just not the largest case in the world. But personally, I really like that. Let's take this side panel off though, so you can actually see around the back as well. You can see we've got some room for extra SSDs and things, hard drive cages, but then also loads of thickness here, so if you do want to put hubs and things like we're going to, you can still fit the side panel on without having to cram it all down. You do want to grab this hard drive cage though, because we have all of our screws and things actually located in this cardboard box. We then want to grab our motherboard, and because we're using a higher end one that actually has this IO shield baked in, we don't need to pre-populate this little socket down there, but if you're going for an entry-level build, you'd have to put a bit of like metal sheeting essentially in there that comes in the box. But otherwise, just grab your board and just gently lay it down into position, and then you find there's this little catch here that holds the motherboard in place before you use the screws that come in the box to actually screw it and secure it down. So these are all of the cables that we need, including our USB 3, we've got our front panel audio, we've got USB Type-C, power switch, and then power LEDs, and I imagine that is a reset switch. USB 3 is this big one at the right-hand side, and just above that, you've got your USB Type-C, and then all of these really fiddly connections are at the bottom right of the motherboard. If you're unsure which is which, then I would highly advise you check your motherboard manufacturer's manual, because it tells you really clearly. As I've already mentioned, you do get 2 fans fitted as standard to this, but we are going to swap them out, and to do this, you just want to... Alright, I was going to say use a bit of force. Maybe it's a fair bit of force. Oh no, I'm being silly. That's every other case. Alright, I am being stupid. You literally just take the front off. I'm sorry, don't listen to first, Marcus. Listen to second. So just gently remove the front panel, then you can remove the 4 screws that hold the existing fan in position. And then frankly, we can move on to the most extravagant bit of this build, and if you wanted to save money, this would be the first thing I would say get rid of. These are Corsair's QX RGB fans. They are great, they look incredible. They've actually got a temperature sensor inside every fan, so you can like see the thermals of every single bit of airflow essentially in your system. But these are very expensive, and we've got 4 of these. So yes, very, very expensive, but they do match the cooler, and it's going to mean it's going to be very straightforward to actually get these set up. So let's take these out of the box, and if my planning was correct, we should at least get a cable inside the box as well to hook this up, because we're going to form a chain of 3 and then hopefully daisy chain them all together. This is my plan. If it doesn't work, then it's sad times. But once you have made a frankly ludicrous outlay on these fans, you can then start to enjoy them, because to get them together, you literally just push them in like that, and you can do that with all 3 of your fans, and then the whole thing can just be mounted as one unit like this. Well, actually they go on the inside, but like this. Pretty cool. Let's do the same with our rear fan. And then this is the bit that I'm not really looking forward to, because as we know on the channel,
I hate radiators.
And this, which is a smaller case and a thick radiator, not necessarily the best combination, especially when you have to kind of fiddle and get all of the cables and things in. So what I'm going to do is walk you through this, because it's not quite as easy as it might seem. We're going to be using this as an exhaust, so it would normally just be a case of literally grabbing our radiator look and then lining this up and mounting it like that. Really easy. But if you do want to make things even easier, I would highly recommend that you actually get your power supply cables and actually connect them now, because anything that you're going to need to plug in at the top here is going to be a lot harder to do after the fact. As soon as this is on, you won't really be able to access this very easily. And actually, the power supply we're going for is Corsair. This isn't sponsored by Corsair, by the way, just they seem to have the right stuff at the right price on the Scan website. We've got some custom cables though, and I really love these. I've used these before. These are the Pro PSU cable kit. This is a Type 4 kit for a Type 4 power supply. If you're going for one of Corsair's new Shift ones, that's a Type 5, so make sure you buy the right kit. But red cables for a all AMD build I thought would be a pretty good idea, right? The one that we're after is this one that says CPU on it, and because we're not going for like a really high wattage CPU or anything, we don't actually need to worry about plugging both of these CPU connections in, so one 8-pin will suffice. You literally just want to gently place the cable into position till it clicks, and then you can of course fold this through to the other side. And if you are copying this but you're using a non-modular power supply where all of the cables are actually pre-fitted to the PSU, then obviously put the power supply in now and also still plug that in, because this will be really difficult, if not impossible to do after you've got that rad fitted. I think in this bag as well there's also this little dummy cable for the radiator, so it can like send a signal to the motherboard so it actually knows something's plugged in. But the cooler is actually going to be the brain of your cooling system now, so your motherboard doesn't really need to do anything, but it can freak out and tell you that there's no cooler installed. So you do get this like single dummy cable, and again that's going to be way easier to plug this in now. So let's find the CPU fan, which is just this little grey one here, and then feed this through to the back. But now actually comes the real moment of truth. Let's see how easy this is to fit down. Please be careful with this bottom bit, as there's thermal paste pre-applied, and if that bit of plastic comes off, it can smear everywhere and potentially ruin your thermals. It depends how much thermal paste you get in your case, but you don't want to do that. Instead, just gently line this up at the top, then screw that into position. So that is in loosely for now, but the slightly complicated bit of actually getting everything plugged into each other now begins. And it's not the end of the world if you can't get everything plugged in one single chain, but it means you might need to buy an extra Corsair cable, because they don't really give you many in the box. They give you a load of short ones now, but you only get one long one with the kit. This back fan can connect to this block of 3 fans here. The front 3 fans can then connect to the cooler itself. And assuming everything works properly, I'm then hoping that the cooler can then go back in to these fans. But I will say you will need to install iCUE to configure this properly. I think this actually is going to be set up properly, but essentially the cooler by default will find like a block of 2 or 3 fans depending on what cooler you've gone for, and say, okay, those are the fans for the cooling. But you might find that the 3 fans on the front are not the ones that are attached to the radiator, which is why I need to configure them in software so you can actually tell them which fans are which. I mean, I'm stepping back for a second, and I've got to admit, I'm not 100% happy, and essentially there is a solution to this, but Corsair, because they want you to daisy chain everything together, it means you might end up with like bits like this, where the cable's quite short and kind of get like doubles back on itself, just so everything connects together. Whereas actually, if you were to probably buy the 3-pack of fans, it comes with an extra hub and an extra cable. So what you could then do would be to have essentially one chain here, another one here, and another one there. And this would actually then eliminate that ugly cable, and potentially some of this one actually as well. So this is what it's like if you do it exactly how I've done it. But yes, if you wanted to get rid of this cable run, then you would need to have an extra hub and an extra cable, which can be done with a 3-pack that isn't actually that much more expensive.
But it's already very expensive.
But let's take this opportunity to actually finish our cooling, shall we? And the easiest way to do this is to lay it down flat, grab our little pump head block like this, and then actually this has got the wrong mounting bracket on. If you want to put the AMD bracket on, you remove the default one. It's very straightforward. You just want to grab the new ends, slot it into position, and then the whole thing literally just clamps down on those screws before securing down into position with the nuts. But let's now move on to what always has to be the most exciting bit of any rig, and I also want to get the anticipation over and done with, because there is a chance that this card is too big for this case. I think it'll be fine, but I didn't check this because I don't follow my own advice. And this is an awesome graphics card. It's the 7900 GRE. It actually stands for Golden Rabbit Edition. This used to be China only, I believe, but now the rest of the world have got it apparently, which is pretty cool. And this pretty much sits between the 7800 XT and the 7900. So if you want to play like 4K gaming or high-end 1440p and you want to turn a lot of the settings up, this is basically the card that you want to be looking at. But let's actually take a look at this GPU, shall we? Because I haven't seen this yet. This is one from Sapphire. It is their Pulse GPU, and I think we're going to be okay. It is a big boy, but not the absolute largest. There you go. That looks pretty mean, actually. I love the look of these fans. I haven't really seen this before. I need to get more Sapphire cards in. That is pretty cool, right? And the big test is going to be whether this fits, and yes, no issues there. Getting this installed should be very straightforward. All we need to do is grab our screwdriver and then just remove the slot covers from 2 and 3. I mean, it depends on your motherboard. If you've gone for like micro ATX, then you'll probably do 1 and 2, but most boards it's 2 and 3. Then you can proceed to actually pick up your GPU and then line this up with the slots. There we go, I think we got it. Yes, and you should hear an audible click, and then all you need to do is screw that back down and you're sorted. With the GPU in place, it's just a couple more bits to go and then we're completely done. The first one being actually getting our RGB fans installed with this hub, and it is magnetic, so you can pretty much place it anywhere really. But I do need to get this connected actually to the fans at the bottom, which is easier said than done. Yes, there we go, that sounds good to me. So now we have our cable. This connects to the hub just like this. All we essentially need to do is give this some power and USB, and then obviously plug in our little dummy cable that we fed in earlier. Then we have a micro USB, not USB-C for some reason, that actually connects into the hub itself. And then there it is, I'm looking around for it, our power supply connection. And I will say that this is a PCIe, so do make sure you have enough PCIe connections on your power supply to actually plug this in, because the old-fashioned ones were SATA or Molex, whereas this actually can use even more power than the older generations of hardware, and thus it has a higher degree of power connection. So I'm going to remove that SSD bracket, and then I'm going to put that just there. And then I'll also grab that USB and feed it through to the other side before that connects just down here at the bottom. Right then, home stretch now. And the last piece of the puzzle is going to be the power supply, because obviously without this, well, you wouldn't have a working system. This essentially takes all of the power, well, not all of the power, as much power as it needs from the mains, and then obviously converts this into all of the right voltages for all the different components. And the one that we've got here is one of my favorites. It's from Corsair. It is the RM850E, and this does actually support ATX3 and PCI 5 as well. So So if you do want to go for a future graphics card that actually does support this and you want that one cable 12 pin, then it is supported with this power supply natively, which is pretty cool. Obviously this is fully modular, which is why it doesn't have any cables connected to it, and 850 watts is great because it's more than what we need for our rig today and does allow us an upgrade path without having to like swap out to an entire new and expensive power supply, which is good. But getting this connected should be fairly straightforward, but obviously we do need to make sure all of the cables are actually plugged into this because it's a lot easier to do that now than when it's actually inside the rig. Obviously, a reminder, these are not the standard cables. You'll get black ones inside the box, but if you want to make it look a little bit more fancy, then this is an easy way to upgrade your rig. But it should be fairly straightforward. Just grab your power supply, find all the ends that are labeled as Type 4 or PSU, and then just put them in their respective positions. And don't forget about the one that you've already connected for the CPU. So now with all of that out of the way, we can hopefully just gently drop this down into position. Sometimes that HD audio connection will get in the way, which is a little bit annoying, but actually here seems to be okay. Then you can secure this down into position with the hex screws. And then hopefully the very last thing is, of course, just to get all of these cables plugged in. So we've got one PCIe for this hub. The ATX goes around the side here, and then all the way below that you can put your PCIe so that when you give this a spin round, everything is now in the right position. So we can plug our graphics card in with these two 8-pins, which should be as simple as that. And then actually what should be the last piece of the puzzle, our large ATX that you really can't miss on the right hand side of the board, go through like that. And then I think with that is actually everything pretty much done. I mean, there's always tidying to be done. There's no point going like too ham on it until obviously you've got everything complete and set up and actually working. But I think the color scheme really works. I mean, this is definitely like an all AMD system, isn't it? The cables go perfectly with the GPU, and I think all we need to do is see if this works. I mean, I probably should show you around the back as well. I haven't clamped these down, but as you can see, it's going to be very easy to get this all managed because there's not really any cable bulk bar the extra cables that, granted, we added ourselves. So let's put this to the test, shall we, with our keyboard, mouse, and of course the PC-centric mouse mat available at pccentric.store. Here we are then. We've done this together. I share your anticipation. Well, it's on, and we've got fans spinning, but no RGB just yet, but that's okay. Give it a second. Yes, there we go. It's definitely bright. I don't think you can argue that. I know it's not going to be to everyone's taste, but obviously the other thing you can do as well is to customize it. So if you want it to just be white or blue, or maybe cycle between a couple of colors, obviously you can do this. You could probably make it red, actually, couldn't you? That would make more sense, so it's a full AMD system. But we haven't got anything on screen, I hear you cry. Well, that's because I think I've been a bit of a numpty, and I've got this set to HDMI, not DisplayPort. There we are. Yes, new CPU installed, so we are pretty much all set up and ready to go. The only other thing we need to do is walk off stage and grab ourselves a USB flash drive with a copy of Windows on it, whack this in the back of our system. We can then press F1 to go into the BIOS itself, and there's only a couple things we really need to do. The first one is to enable AMD Expo, so we're getting the full rated speed on the memory. You would also want to tune your fans normally, but because we're going for iCUE system, we don't actually need to do this. But then you also want to make sure that resize bar is on, which it is. So that pretty much is everything really. So we're going to save and reset. And then assuming that the memory actually overclocks properly to its full rated speed, we should do what we've done here, which is now to load into Windows. So I'll spare you the full process, but it is very straightforward. We basically just hit install now. We say we don't have a product key, unless you do at this stage. Select the version of Windows that you want. So for me, it's Windows 11 Home. Choose the drive, which is here as unallocated space. Press next, and then that's it. The rest of the Windows will install for you, and you're pretty much all ready to go. But if you do want to actually see everything that I do with my personal rig to get it ready for gaming, all of the optimizations, all of the downloads, everything, I've just made that video. You can find it in the top right corner of your screen. That will walk you through pretty much everything. So then, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, all set up and apparently running the computer that's on the floor and ready to go because we have now got Windows installed. We've actually got our game running, our first of many, and I have also installed iCUE as well, and we've got it all customized. So I've set everything to like a static red, but I've got an extra visor effect that goes through it as well, just to give it a little bit extra glow. But obviously there are loads of different things you can do in the iCUE software, but we've definitely got a very red rig here, which makes it a nice change. But let's jump straight into the gameplay though, and I wanted to kick off actually with some Horizon, as this is Horizon Forbidden West, and it is a title that does actually support AMD's FSR as well. We'll talk a little bit more about some AMD technologies in just a second, but this is fairly typical for what you can expect from from a more modern game. Obviously, you can also get titles that have frame generation in them as well, but just to show you the graphics options that we've got at the moment, this is set to very high, so it looks very, very good indeed. And we've actually got this set to 4K as well, so this is definitely a very high-end game running on this high-end system. And as you can see, the frame rate is really, really good actually, around about 73 FPS. And I'd say typically if you're using a mouse and keyboard, anything between 60 and 100 is good for a game like this. But obviously if you're using a controller, then 60 itself would be absolutely fine, especially if you pair this with like a FreeSync monitor or something like that, then yes, it's going to work really rather well. But I do realise that a lot of you probably won't be playing at 4K, so let's see what happens if we turn it down to 1440. And we have kept FSR to the exact same ultra setting, and now you can see we're getting around about 100 to 120 FPS, which really isn't too shabby whatsoever. I mean, I was perfectly happy with the 4K frame rate, but again, it goes to show that if you do spend that little bit extra on a gaming PC, and I mean, the GRE is available for what, around about 550, 600 pounds or so, you're clearly getting a very, very flexible GPU, a very flexible system. If you are new to PC gaming, by the way, or you haven't used an AMD GPU before, then essentially this is what your control panel actually looks like. So here you can see we've got all of the games installed on our system, and one of the things I quite like actually is that it kind of monitors the games that you've been playing, and that tells you not only how long you've played it for on the system, but also an average frame rate you've got whilst in that game, which is pretty cool. We're actually recording all of this with a built-in AV1 encoder that's actually on the AMD 7000 series of GPUs. And one of the other things that I really like is that they do make it very easy to not only optimize your titles, but also to get extra performance. And the way that they do this is very straightforward. So you go over into the graphics option of the software, and then you enable this HyperRX feature. And this will, it depends on the game because different games have different features. So if you're playing something that doesn't have FSR or it doesn't have the frame generation feature, then essentially you can do it at a driver level and it will give you better performance from your game without actually having to know what the settings do. You can literally just toggle it on. So here you can actually just say HyperRX. It'll give you like a quick explainer on what it is and what you need to do to get it to work. But generally speaking, you just turn that on and you're away. Oh, moving on to our next title, I was about to say, we have some Starfield, and this is a save where I essentially ran in through like a cave system, and I've got some people chasing me. So what you're seeing now might actually get a little bit heated very, very quickly. But yes, this is running at 4K with FSR set to 75% actually in this game. We don't have frame generation enabled at the moment, and in this cave system, we're currently getting around about 70 FPS, though I will say that once you get outside and there's a lot more going on, obviously your frame rate will drop. But this still, again, goes to show that you don't have to spend like an absolutely crazy amount of money to get the ultimate gaming PC, because if you do want to play at 4K and you're happy to use FSR, then you can achieve very high frame rates just with the upscaling techniques. But let's go into the options menu and actually see what happens if we turn our frame generation feature on. I imagine our frame rate will increase, and yes, that definitely looks a whole lot smoother now. Now, frame generation does add a slight latency penalty, because obviously you're using AI to generate rendered frames rather than obviously rendering them natively with the GPU. And in practice, the technology really does work rather well, but you should be aware of the limitation, which is essentially that it doesn't give you more frame rate. It essentially smooths out the frame rate so that visually it looks as if you have the same frame rate, if that makes sense. Gameplay wise, it should feel very similar to how it does with the feature turned off, but as there is that ever so slight latency penalty applied from the AI, then obviously if you're using this for multiplayer, I'd actually advise turning it off. But for something like Starfield, where this is a single player experience and you want to maximize your frame rate and have it looking as good as possible, it's a really nice tool in your arsenal. Oh, actually, hang on a minute. Whoa. I realize we haven't done the peel. This thing is just sitting there and it's looking sad. Oh, we had a little bit of a delay there, so I'm going to drop a couple of points. I'm going to say 7.7 out of 10, but this is what it looks like, by the way, in its full rainbow mode. But ladies and gentlemen, the time for single player is over, and we're now in multi, and as you can see, things have definitely taken a turn for the worst, as we are now playing some Apex Legends. I did actually already record this once, but I forgot to record the gameplay, which was a little bit silly. But this is a really interesting test, actually, because this is a game that doesn't natively support the FSR technology, the upscaling stuff, so essentially you have to render it native, which is great from an image quality point of view, but obviously you're losing a lot of potential FPS, because that technology is not there. And what you can see now is that we're getting a pretty incredible frame rate actually of around about 230 all the way up to 300 FPS. And the way that we're doing this is with that setting that we showed you earlier in the AMD control panel, where essentially we're outputting at 4K, but internally we've got this set to 1440p, and then the AMD engine, if you like, sort of handles the rest. And it's really quite fascinating because it definitely is in between 1440p and 4K. It doesn't look quite as good as native, but it's really not that far off. But when have you ever really seen a frame rate of around about 300 FPS at 4K that isn't from like the top end graphics card? I must admit that I hadn't used this before in Apex Legends, and now I feel a little bit like a fool because clearly the evidence speaks for itself. We've also got Radeon Boost enabled as well, anti-lag, and all of this stuff comes together to give you a really pretty pristine and perfect in Apex Legends multiplayer experience actually. It's really quite fascinating. In terms of temperatures, by the way, our GPU is currently running at 75 degrees and what looks like 84 degrees on the hotspot. We're using around about 9 gig or so on the GPU memory, but obviously if you're going to be playing at 4K in really intense titles, especially if you're going to be turning things like ray tracing on, that does eat into the VRAM. And then thermals for the CPU, as you'd expect, aren't particularly high, around about 62 degrees or so. And in terms of noise, barely anything. So, I mean, that was to be expected. Obviously, we've gone for very high-end fans. And I think that's the main thing I would really raise about this system, is that I think I got a little bit carried away in the configurator, and you could save yourself a whole bunch of money by not going for this fan configuration. Same with the cables. I mean, in the end, it was just really 2 cables you can see, so those probably weren't worth it. But as a system as a whole, I think it's fantastic, and I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you make of the GRE? What do you make of the performance? All of the AMD features, actually, in Apex. If you have an AMD card, turn this on, at least try it out, because yeah, that's genuinely blown my mind a little bit. I feel a bit silly for not using it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, get yourself subscribed. If you do want to check out current pricing on anything featured in this video, then obviously it's all available at Scan Computers, so a link to that will be located down below, and of course if you are located worldwide, we'll have some other links for you as well. But thank you so much for watching this video. We'll catch you in the next one.